You are listening to Personalization Outbreak, a podcast about the collapse of traditional corporate standards in today's more personalized world. I'm Glenn Llopis. I'm a leadership strategist, author, contributor to Forbes, and founder of the Leadership in the Age of Personalization movement. On this show, I'm interviewing executives across multiple sectors to find out how the balance between standardization and personalization can exist. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Personalization Outbreak Podcast. Let's face it. Financial stress is a reality for many of us. And recent global events like the intensifying tariff wars have only added to this burden. But have you ever wondered how money stress actually impacts your life at work? Could financial pressure be fueling burnout, reducing your engagement, and even lowering your job satisfaction? Well, I got a surprise for you. We have a guest today that's going to help us uncover these questions and dig deep into them because they're important and we don't talk about them enough. So joining us today is Camden Cusumano, a PhD candidate in the Department of Financial Planning, Housing, and Consumer Economics at the University of Georgia. Now, I've had a chance to spend a little time with Camden. He's a good guy. He's done his homework. And I think what's really cool about him is that this stuff really matters to him. And I'm going to have him share a little bit about how he got into this field of study, because I think it has a lot of relevance. And we just don't dive into these things enough because why? They're so personal, just like work, more personal than ever before. But we'll hear from Camden's groundbreaking research that reveals real powerful connections between financial stress and workplace burnout. In fact, a recent study conducted by Camden showed that employees overwhelmed by financial pressures actually experience higher emotional exhaustion and lower engagement at work. Look, I've been on the call with many people over the last week, and this seems to be the topic. In fact, there was something on LinkedIn today that talked about what people no longer want to hear about well-being. And while I find those articles insightful, what's missing is what do you do about it and how do you do it? So again, Camden's going to get us to look deep into his research to help us understand those things better. And his perspectives on the importance on not just how to serve employees' psychological needs and improving the person-environment fit, but also job design and how the workforce can be transformed through better well-being. So before we get started, please click the like button below, share it with your colleagues, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and social media at Glenn Llopis. Camden, welcome to the show, man. Really happy to have you, and really thank you for your time.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate you having me on the podcast. I'm excited to kind of dig a little bit deeper into some of the questions and stuff that we'll get into. So yeah, thanks again for having me.
No problem. Okay, Camden, we talked about this a little bit, but how did you get into this field of interest? Like you had some path to get there. How did you get there, and why does it matter to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the key, when I think back and reflect on how I kind of got where I am, I think back to a class I had. It was a marketing seminar. And so because of the setup of this course, we would read papers and talk about them in class. One of the papers that we read was actually an editorial for a marketing journal. This editorial was talking about better marketing for a better world. And I said, wow, that's a pretty good title. I think I'd like to learn a little bit more about that. And the authors in this piece proposed kind of a quadrant where they had on one side, what is good for the firm, and on another side, what is good for the world. So obviously with the quadrant, we had, a lose-lose square, but there were two other squares where it was good for the world, maybe bad for the firm, and good for the firm and bad for the world. But what my eyes really were drawn to was this win-win square, this quadrant where both sides could win. And I was kind of inspired by this, where I thought, a lot of times when we look at, how corporations might exist and engage in the world, we might think about managers versus employees or something like that. But there's really an opportunity for both of us to come to the table and think about how can we both benefit each other. If you go back to, even just a basic economics concept of game theory, there's this idea, where there's a tit for tat. You can push against me and I'll push back against you. But if we really look about where we can both win, I think there's a lot of questions that we need to ask, like how can we enable actions that benefit multiple stakeholders, not just one or the other? So that's kind of what inspired me to look at this area of how can employees and firms work together to have sustainable relationships.
Okay, let's go deeper into this one. Because you said in the quadrant, it says better for the firm and better for the world, correct?
Correct.
Okay, but did that assume did the world side account for the individual or was just the world?
I think just the world. And so that's actually a great distinction that you made right there.
Well, I think it's important because that's part of what I'm seeing is it for the firm or is it for the individual? And I'm a believer that there's a way to find harmony between the two.
Mhm.
But what I've seen for years is that while it's always about the numbers, that'll never change. There has to be more of a reciprocal value to the individual employee beyond just getting a check. And what I'm finding is that more and more people are feeling suppressed at work because they can't always coexist with the firm and the ways that they want to do things. It always has to be about them. Why can't there be shared and mutual benefit? I don't know. You can comment if you like or not.
No, Glenn, I think that's a great point that you bring up because when we think about, kind of my area of research of employee well-being, the traditional champions of employee well-being are labor unions that use collective bargaining to make sure that workers aren't being exploited. But that's collective bargaining, and that's thinking of workers as a group. And as I kind of explore employee well-being more, I really want to consider the employee as an individual. Instead of coming in and becoming just a cog on the wheel, how does an employee not check who they are at the door, but get to exist as that individual inside and outside of work?
Well, see, that's what I love. And is that you're already wondering if terms such as the employee is the right term. Because if it is, then we are asking people to leave their individuality at the door when it is indeed their individuality that allows them to be a great employee, or at least we would hope.
Absolutely.
So could you just take a moment to break down the key challenge your research really aims to address?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I touched on it a little bit, but to be a little bit more clear, is that it really is how does the individual, in this case, sometimes the employee, but how do we consider the ways in which the relationship between work and the individual, the unique individual, lead to well-being? So kind
Mm.
of going back to your point, not thinking about just an employee, but how does this unique individual in this relationship with work lead to well-being?
Now, is there a lot of research out there? And the reason I'm sure there's quite a bit, but is it really addressing this issue about unique individual, or is it still at a very surface level? I'm just kind of curious because now the world has changed, and a lot of the research that's out there is still thinking about firm, employee, cog in the wheel. But now, as we're seeing this age of personalization and real emphasis on the individual, is there a lot out there?
So I think it depends on where you look. I think if you
Hmm.
look at the traditional employee literature, there's a lot about kind of looking at an employee, not really an individual, within the context of work. But there have been some theories and work done, such as work-family conflict and stuff in that realm, that starts to think about, okay, you have the employee or the individual, but what about maybe conflicts at home that are starting to be show up at work, and stuff like this. So I think bridging that gap, of course, we got to stand on the shoulders of the people that have done work before us, but really moving towards thinking about how we can move away from just considering employee well-being within this siloed context of work? And how are there other factors that are really contributing to the person as a unique individual? I'm going to borrow your term, but really that personalization within the work context. How does that, we can examine it within the work context, but how are we also thinking about things that are factors that shape it outside of just work itself?
Love it. Love it. Well, first of all, thanks for being so honest about this. And why is this so important? Because I actually believe it's people like you. And that's what really intrigued me about you. Not just that you're young and you're hip and you're smart, but you really care about these things and they really matter to you because you realize that these are things that you and your friends talk about. Is that fair enough?
No, absolutely. That's a great point.
And so as you're talking about it, trying to explore it, then there's people from my generation that think, well, why does that stuff matter, man? I'm just here to assimilate, do my job, get paid, and do something with my life, only to find out that in that process, they're losing their individual identity. Thus, they can't bring not just their whole self, but their potential and their capacities. And then it's not until later on in life do they have maybe an opportunity to discover them. But it's not that it's ever too late. It's having to make up for all that lost time, which means making up for all the lost time that they lost to not just trust the institution, but themselves. So these things can create this effect where it becomes so overwhelming. And what you're doing now is trying to really dig deeper to say, hey, okay, we have to respect what was researched in the past, but this is a new day, and we need to be really opening our eyes to discover new things that are really at the forefront right now of reshaping how we see work, what workplace means, and the bottom line, the overall definition of well-being. So if I can just go off track here a minute, how from the work that you've done would you define at its core well-being? And I know there's like 10, 12 factors that shape well-being, but how would you kind of summarize it?
That's a great question. And I'm probably going to butcher it because there are so many definitions of well-being. And
okay, I'm going to have fun with you. I'm going to have fun with you. Okay, I'm going to have fun because we're going to keep it real.
yeah,
If it's what you think it is based
uh-huh.
upon your work, you're not butchering anything. You're just giving me your own personalized version of what you see and think based on your work. You see the difference? And it's interesting because we seem to always fall into that trap of thing of already quantifying or validate. Hey guys, I might say something that's wrong,
Uh-huh.
but hope you're flowing here with me.
Oh, yeah.
But this is part of us being real here. Those are common things. Heck, I still do them. I mean, because we think that just by saying what we really think, someone's going to start judging or disagreeing when all we're trying to do is understand this stuff. So keep going. I'm sorry, I won't go there anymore.
No. Yeah, I think well-being to me would be, encompassing both the psychological, the emotional, as well as some objective characteristics that measure well-being. So not just how you're feeling, but how are you actually doing? When we talk about the way that we measure things in research, it's good to both have subjective and objective measures. So when we're thinking about well-being, kind of considering how both of those things feed into how a person is really doing.
What's the difference between feeling and doing, just for our audience? How do you define the differences?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think from like a research perspective, the feeling would be just reflecting on a statement, how much you agree or disagree, where the doing would be trying to capture and measure a behavior, how much do you save each month, stuff like that, versus how do you feel about your savings? Do you feel like you've saved enough?
Perfect, which is a great transition to the research that you've been doing on the correlation between financial stress and how it impacts the workplace. So, what inspired you to explore the money stress as a root cause of burnout rather than focusing solely on traditional job related factors? So, I'm going to let you riff here because I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to what we talked about a little bit earlier, the work that has looked at employees as individuals outside of the work context, spillover theory is an important theory to consider.
Mhm.
Spillover theory, just kind of on its face, is just talking about how we have different life domains. So I might have a work domain, I have a family domain, I have a health domain. And instead of studying those siloed within that domain, kind of what we talked about, is how
Mhm.
does stress or good things or bad things from one domain spill over into another? And so thinking about job satisfaction, why not consider how finances might relate to this? It seems like when we talk about it in conversation, that it's pretty easy to think about, well, yeah, maybe my finances would relate to my job as they're so interconnected. But when we look at research, that's not always the case. And so using spillover theory is a way to connect financial domains to work domains.
So, if you could help us uncover how managing today's financial stress really drains workers and diminishes their sense of fulfillment.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about financial stress and we think about how that might be a drain, the theory that we applied to really understand how this may work is the conservation of resources theory. And so this theory really talks about how when there's stress to me, whether it's perceived loss or actual loss of my resources, that can cause stress in my life.
Hmm.
And so we kind of posit that financial well-being is a durable resource. And when there's threat or actual loss of this resource of financial well-being, that can cause stress and spill over into other areas of my life. So to kind of summarize it, a threat to my resources from my finances might spill over to the satisfaction that I see in my job.
So let's spend some time on this. The correlation of loss of resources, which finance is a huge one for people, right? Because they have a tremendous spillover effect,
Right.
and well-being. So, um, today in the workplace, for example, more and more people want autonomy in their work.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because it's not that they don't want to work with other people, but they're finding that working with other people that have different points of view can sometimes create uh, productivity challenges. I like to think that they should create opportunities. But a lot of people don't take the time to get to know each other or see each other well enough to work through those differences. So people want more autonomy to do things on their own terms. Um, and they're trying to almost create their own type of resources so they don't have to feel so dependent, not just on everybody else, but on other resources that don't even exist anymore. And now that we have AI as one example, and this is not an AI discussion, but people will have a tendency to use that as a valuable source of resource, depending upon the kind of work that they do. But I shared this because resources at work are diminishing. And what does this mean? That we're really at a at an inflection point of if we don't know people's core, true, authentic capabilities, then do we really know the resources that we need to be successful? In other words, just because you have a certain skill and you can do these 10 things that the organization is telling you, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to find success because they're making the assumption that this is what we need to do in order to meet X. Maybe it's someone's capability that draws people to think a different way and to approach a different opportunity that might be the X that we should be striving for. In other words, that when you have a reduction in resources, people are more apt to start assimilating, playing it safe, and being told what to do. And this concerns me. Now, when you throw financial aspects of stress into this mix of resources, it can, for I believe it can be something that can further hinder one's ability to take chances and seek for more opportunity. Is this clicking? Do you see any connection points here? Because I've got to believe that there comes a point where if someone's going to play it so safe, not take so many chances, work with what they have rather than create resources that don't exist, either through their own capacities or relationships that they may have, that we start getting to a point where productivity becomes mediocrity. I don't know. I would just riff in there. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you touched on a couple of things that are really pertinent. And even as you were talking, I was brainstorming as well. When you're talking about, some of this um, diminishing of resources, it makes me think of a scarcity mindset. And we know from scarcity, people start to actually kind of close up and they don't take as many risks. And it actually is diminishing of their well-being. As well, I was thinking about with the conservation of resources and kind of what you were talking about, that really does contribute to this idea of burnout, right? And so what we did is we looked at this idea of financial well-being as a resource, and we measured it in two different capacities, right? One was expected future financial security, but one is exactly what you're talking about, the current money management stress. So when I feel that current stress and that scarcity mindset, how does that kind of relate to, what I'm feeling at work? And, maybe I'm also just kind of riffing here as well, but maybe, for example, that scarcity mindset is also going to make me kind of look around and say, I've got to keep this job, so I'm scared to take risks. I'm scared to maybe change the culture that really is kind of diminishing my well-being and also causing or really kind of influencing this burnout at work.
Now that you bring up burnout and its relationship to well-being, do you think that people really know the severity of the state of well-being? Are we just still learning?
I think we're still learning. I think when I read popular press, different news articles, a lot of times I feel like there's headlines that, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of companies that are doing the right thing out there for sure. But it seems like there's a disconnect between what a company is providing and what a worker needs. Kind of talking back to a little bit of your autonomy and competence, those are the basic psychological needs that we know from research, which is relatedness, competence, and autonomy. And we know that those influence well-being. So as a corporation thinks about how they can boost this employee well-being, are they really considering how people feel like they belong at work? Are they really considering how they make people feel competent in their roles? Are they providing training, stuff like that? Are they providing that autonomy to make decisions based on, hey, I'm feeling this at work. I need the autonomy to shift, to change, to create, job craft a new type of role for myself.
I love it. The conversation's now getting started, my friend. You're doing great. This is it. But what I love about this is now you're starting to expand your thinking around, at least in how you're sharing this, that I think is now getting people to ask themselves, wait a second, am I getting what I really need from a well-being perspective? And, so having said that, any other details around the financial, the research you've done with respect to the correlation between financial stress and well-being, and is there some research out there that maybe you would like to explore more about that maybe you haven't gotten to yet? Where are you at with this on this journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things I'd like to touch on too on this specific study is as we're talking about the financial well-being, we talked about the expected future financial security, and I kind of brushed over that a little bit. But as we think about how what a job is and what it means to an individual, we know the current money management stress of today. But when we think about what a job can mean for a person, going beyond just putting food on the table, and at its core, that is what an occupation does. We've got to have a way to pay our bills and put food on the table. But if we can kind of dream for a second here, how can a job help me accomplish my financial goals that I have down the road? And thinking about that, how does that influence employee well-being and job satisfaction? You can provide a job that not only helps satisfy the needs of today, how can it help me have satisfaction in my life, as I see that I'm achieving financial goals that I've set out for in the future? So I think exploring that, and then also looking at, I kind of touched on it already, but these basic psychological needs, how are those being met within the workplace? And then also going back to burnout, how do we get past it? It feels like we understand a lot of the antecedents and consequences, but now that we have employees that are experiencing burnout at very high rates, how do they move through that? So that's a question that I'd also like to answer. Do we give employees more autonomy to be able to rebalance the scales? How do they kind of, recalibrate when they're in the midst of burnout? And so that's a question that I'd really like to dig into as I move forward.
Well, I'd love to add a little bit to that. How about we
Absolutely.
do that? Let's have a little discussion around this. Well, first of all, let's go back. I have one question.
Mhm.
In your research or just in your experience, do you think that there's a there will lie more responsibility on the individual to figure out their money management long-term goals, or do you think that there will become more of a responsibility on the employer? And you might be thinking, well, why does the employer have to do with that? I mean, they pay you a salary. You got to live within your means, or you got to work harder or do something different to get promoted and make more money. I mean, at what point does the employer have to feel that they have a sense of responsibility in helping people advance in their careers, regardless of whether they stay in that organization or not?
Glenn, I think that's a great question. As I've moved through this research, I really started back kind of at the beginning of employee rights around the early 1900s, factory workers. And as I moved through, I examined this kind of obsolescence of the golden watch promise
Hmm.
of staying at a company for 20, 25 years, getting a gold watch and a pension. And that's kind of obsolete. We don't really see too many occupations now that still offer pension plans for employees and stuff like that. So I think that's a really interesting question of where are we headed? It seems like the labor market kind of had a big shift through COVID, through the Great Resignation, stuff like that, of people trying to figure out when all the chips land, where do we go? So I think that's a question that we're going to continue to try and answer as we move forward. Of whose responsibility is it? As we look at kind of the power dynamic shift and stuff like that, do we try and look at that quadrant going back all the way to the beginning where there's an opportunity for both parties to kind of come together and collaborate, or is it going to be this kind of struggle back and forth of a pendulum between employee and employer and how that kind of works?
Well, you said this without even knowing it. We've reached a point of reinvention. We have to start, respecting the past, but also breaking away from it too. It's kind of like a legacy. I could respect the legacy that got us to where we're at, but I also believe that we need to start creating future legacies because times have changed. And my question becomes is how sustainable is all of this? And do we actually have enough time to reinvent? I'm not asking you to jump on that one, but it makes us, think about this question. And it takes it, if I go back to the issue of burnout you brought up, I'll give you a perspective. You want to jump in, please do. You know what I've learned in the 20 years of my work? Um, is that people have been holding on to so much for too long. What do I mean? I've seen worked with thousands of people, and this started back uh, 20 years ago. But I really started seeing it about 17 years ago, where when I would have deeper discussions, people would start to cry. And I often wondered, why are people crying? And then I came to realize it's because in explaining why someone may be feeling something or doing something that they know isn't right, not because they're doing something illegal, but they're doing something that they know that they just don't inherently believe in. You kind of swallow that. And when you start talking to somebody about something that they can see themselves in that story, they start letting go, like emotionally. And what I've learned over time is the more you can get people to let go, the more they begin to free themselves of burnout. Because what is burnout in the very end of the day? I don't have enough energy to get through the day. I'm done. I'm just done. I'm baked. But if you can start almost forgiving yourself of the past and start anew by literally rewiring yourself to put more, have more confidence in who you are rather than needing somebody else to validate that for you. It's incredible how much more energy we reclaim So we actually have more energy than we ever had in the past, but we have it to do other things that we wish that we were capable of doing in the past, but never had the energy to do it. I don't know. Did that resonate with you at some level?
Yeah, absolutely, Glenn. I think some of the things you were talking about made me think about, a strategy for moving through burnout, might be setting some boundaries. Kind of what you were talking about, not compromising. When there's a situation where it might go kind of against what you believe or how you believe, how do you respond to that? Do you have boundaries in place that are hard stops for you? Now, that's easy to say as we're talking here and now. Doing that is another thing, being able to execute on that. So I think kind of understanding of the boundary is what lets you let go. Not feeling like you have to carry all of that weight with you all of the time. Maybe it can be, boundaries such as, hey, after this set in time, I'm not going to look at my email any longer. And I'm going to have to say that that's going to be okay with, the people that I work with, just communicating that like, hey, this is my hard stop time. And I know it feels small and simple, but kind of what you're talking about, letting go and allowing yourself that time and conserving your own resources and your energy, I think is going to be something that I would like to look into as to how people might deal with burnout.
Well, I love what you said because you said something else is that willingness to unlearn self-inflicted habits. Because a lot of these boundaries, we create them ourselves out of the fear of judgment or being told that we're doing something wrong. And I find that all of these things, I know it's a big topic, but when you consider these factors, it's so easy to get burnt out today because there's so much that's being asked of us from people that oftentimes we don't respect because they're telling us to do things that they think is right, but it was something that was relevant in the past, but not in the present. So you have knowledge gaps, you have lack of wisdom, you have these growing gaps of people that just aren't prepared for today's new challenges. And I'm not saying that out of any disrespect, but this is part of what I think creates burnout too, is that more and more people are thinking right now, am I really ready for what's happening now? And I can tell you that from my own work, well over 75% of people don't even think they're close. And I can understand why, because when they've been doing something a certain way for so long in this changing world around us, and now you're being asked to do something that you don't really have had the training for, the education for, but they expect you to do it. This just compounds lack of well-being in states of burnout. So I don't know if you have a comment around that. What I love about this discussion is I can tell you what I've seen and what I've researched, and then you validate it with theory, which I love.
Well, I'll try and do that one more time. I think what you're talking about, once again, is that competence piece of a basic psychological need. And when we think about an individual and what they need psychologically in the most basic form, they've got to have that feeling of competence, right? And so when we think about, and I'm not talking about mere intellect, but the training, do I feel like I'm given the resources to execute my job? And also on the flip side, when I do execute my job, am I second guessed? Or does my institution, my company, my firm, do they affirm my authority on this matter of, hey, you gave me the tools to accomplish this. I accomplished it. Where's the trust there? Is there a validation of my competence and am I given the tools to be able to do that as well?
So as we wrap this up, Camden, um, where do you see all this headed? In fact, before you go there, because I will make sure that we take the time for people to learn more about you. First of all, can you share with the group the name of your study and where they can get it? Because everyone needs to get a copy of this.
Yeah, absolutely. So the name of the study is Mind the Gap. And you can find this study. If you just Google it, it'll be on, I think it's Elsevier, the journal. And it should be able to be accessed to anyone that Googles that title. You can Google my name along with it. I've had the pleasure of, just a small joke here, always having be able to make a username of Camden Cusumano. It seems like a one for one. So if you Google my name with that article title, it should be able to come up, which has made it really convenient. So yeah.
And how long did it take you to do the study, Camden?
So this study, the data was collected about a year or two before it was finally published. We did some revisions for about a year. Also, thanks to all the reviewers over at the Journal of Workplace Behavioral Health. They were great in helping us kind of make our article what it is today, gave us some great feedback and such. So it was definitely a journey, but one that I think was iterative and got better along the way at each step.
Well, and this is why you've got to continue on your journey because things are moving so fast and they're falling right into your lane. So keep going, Camden. We need you. So where do you see all of this, these topics headed into the future? What are you envisioning?
Absolutely. So a theory that I think is really going to shape where I go with a lot of this is this idea of person environment fit theory. And so, how does the individual interact with their environment to create a sustainable fit between them and the environment that surrounds them? So, I think as we move forward, it's really considering the employee as an individual and what actions they can take to maintain well-being throughout this kind of changing future of work. So I think it's a conversation that's ongoing and just requires constant visitation of how are the rules changing? What abilities do employees have? What's the relationship between them and corporations? And so I think as we move forward, it's just continuing to ask that question and considering the employee as an individual.
Do you think that people with your type of experience, what you've done in life, uh, the advent of this information and digital age that has given you and your friends and colleagues all this access well before, well, much, much more than I did when I was your age. How do you think this is going to impact the speed in which employers or corporations begin to finally act with speed?
Absolutely. That's a great point. As we move through kind of the digital age of, even when I look on my LinkedIn feed, people are having conversations in real time about what's happening. And it seems like if you're not paying attention, there's a chance you might get left behind. So I think the speed at which these conversations are being had, and now I guess it's like the impact, or even just kind of the word I'm looking for is just kind of like the ability for a lot of people to see it all at once makes these conversations really important. Before you and I might have a conversation and it ends there, but now if even this podcast, a post on LinkedIn, you can have thousands of people have impressions on a post or a comment or a conversation. So I think these things are being talked about, and I think the conversation is moving along a lot faster than it did before.
Couldn't agree with you more. And I think that it's heading is that we're in the process of creating a new language for how we communicate these things. And why do I believe that? Because all of these topics, I think, center around one thing. How do you serve a much more informed and knowledgeable individual? But what we have a tendency of doing, and by no means am I saying this about your work. I mean, you're part of the solution, and you called it like spillover, right? This is another way of saying the same thing, is that you get enough spillover that you realize that it isn't just about one thing or 10 things, it's about 100 or maybe 100,000 things that make up one thing. And if we could focus on that one thing, we can start solving all these other things. But what we have a tendency of doing, and that's why I'm inspired by the fact that you want to keep going and broadening your observations around the things that you're researching, um, is that knowing how to best serve a much more informed and knowledgeable individual is going to force us to not only look at ourselves, but look at other people for who they are, not what they have. And I think that once we get to that point, and I know this because I've done this with thousands of people, it's an entirely different way of creating community and acceptance for change. But as long as we keep using standardized methods that say, oh, okay, Glenn, I get that, but I'm interested out of these 100,000 things that make up this one thing, these five things. And then we just go, these five things. And we take this very iterative, incremental approach. The marketplace will pass us by so much that it's going to put us at a heavy state of risk to the point where I actually think it can go somewhere that I don't even want to think about. Because what I see happening is that the ground rules, institutional ground rules, while they have relevance, are being exchanged with individual empowerment and knowledge. And unless they're operating at the same speed, I think the institution's going to lose. And again, that's just a thought. I'm not trying to create any fear. If anything, I'm trying to shed light on the fact that this is the most opportunistic time in modern history. But when you don't think of it that way, you think about, oh my gosh, Glenn, if it goes there, we're all in trouble. No, it's actually, it can strengthen humanity because I think we've reached a point where humanity is weakening, and it's people like you that's going to help us strengthen it. So I don't know if you have a comment on that before we close.
I think just a small point is that you're exactly right. You can always look at a problem or you can always look at an opportunity. And so I think considering it from that perspective is one of the most important points.
Well, and I love how you simplified what I said, because when we play not to lose is when we see things as a threat. When we play to win, we see it as an opportunity. And so what you just said, again, you're doing a great job, is this is about shifting mindsets. And if we can get our mindset right, it changes the entire game. So Camden, listen, thank you for your time, man. I really appreciate you, who you are as an individual, the work that you've put in, and just inspired to know that you're a role model for future leaders. So keep at it. Don't fall too much into the standardization traps. They're good to know about, but we're in a moment where we're actually modernizing standards now that we're here to serve a much more informed and knowledgeable individual. But do you have any closing comments so we can wrap it up?
I just want to say thank you for having me on, Glenn. I've really appreciated the conversations we've had, the knowledge that we've shared with one another, and just being able to talk to each other and really kind of riff and be able to talk about things that are really important and have such a constructive conversation. So thanks again for having me on. I really appreciate your time.
Camden, I really appreciate you, and I love to continue to stay in touch and following what I know will be an illustrious career for you. But as we end every show, when you lead in the age of personalization, you will see things that others don't. Do what others won't, and keep pushing when prudence says quit. Thanks again for your time, Camden. Really appreciate you.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thanks for listening to Personalization Outbreak. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. If you enjoyed the content, visit ageofpersonalization.com to check out our free streaming video series and learn how to get involved in the movement. I'm Glenn Llopis. I wish you a good day, and remember, without strategy, change is merely substitution, not evolution.